Two police officers of the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary based at Charles Cross Police Station, Plymouth, 1996. Over 160 years on from a meeting on the 15th of January 1836 when the Plymouth Watch Committee appointed as its first town police superintendent John Eastbridge Adams at a salary of £48 per annum. Thus was born the Plymouth Constabulary, and for the first time official policemen took to the streets of Plymouth to enforce law and order. Unlike the modern-day force, its 19th century beginnings were indeed primitive, with a complement of 38 constables to serve the community. Since 1836, the British force has evolved to become one of the most envied in the world, with the present-day Devon and Cornwall Police Authority responsible not only for the policing of the City of Plymouth, but also for securing and maintaining an efficient policing for the largest geographical area in England. Today, the authority handles investigations and prevention of crime, traffic management and preventative patrol, response to emergencies, inquiries from the public, criminal justice and custody of prisoners, plus security and safety at special events. Our film contains part of the history of the Plymouth Police Force under the control of Plymouth itself, from its inception in 1836 to what some consider a sad day on May the 12th, 1967, when the constabulary was absorbed into county-controlled ownership by order of the then Home Secretary Roy Jenkins. With the aid of archive film material, we will observe how through the time city policing has changed, along with people who lived throughout the generations. Indeed, the story we wish to tell in part is of Plymouth and the policing of a city. A parade headed by the band of the Royal Marines signals the end of over 130 years of the Plymouth Constabulary. The salute is taken by the Lord Mayor of Plymouth adjacent to the flagstaff in Royal Parade. Retired Chief Superintendent Ernest Dickety in his Chronicles of the Constabulary reported that Plymouth had every right to feel proud of its force. From its humble beginnings in 1836, this force developed by amalgamation of the three towns, Plymouth, Stonehouse and Devonport in 1914, into a force known and respected throughout the country for its expertise, direction and downright professionalism, as Dickety put it. So, what was considered to be a unique force disappeared, swallowed up in the government-ordered amalgamations. An era had passed, one in which the local beat bobby was an integral part of the community, a son of the city. The future expansion under county control was now almost a necessity. Strength in numbers and administration to combat the ever-increasing lawlessness in a dangerous age. Although there had been a system of law enforcement within the country for many centuries, the biggest change came with the introduction of the new police in the metropolis in 1829 by Sir Robert Peel. Known as the Peelers, their distinctive uniforms were based on those of gentlemen rather than the military style as a mode of distinguishing them. The idea was to prevent crime in addition to apprehending law-breaking individuals as it had been until that time. But the new authority was soon to distinguish itself. The Municipal Cooperations Act of 1835 gave local authorities power to set up forces and appoint superintendents and later chief constables. After a succession of leaders in Plymouth from 1835, Frederick Rayford took office in 1866 with 115 officers in his charge. Joseph Davidson Sowerby in 1914 became the first chief officer of the amalgamated force of 3 towns. Herbert Hans Sanders succeeded Sowerby, a detective inspector from the Metropolitan Police. He introduced the Widows and Orphans Fund in 1917. Archibald Kennedy Wilson came to Plymouth from Carlisle and made his mark at the Dartmoor prison riots in 1932. William Clarence Johnson, a man destined to go to the top, he was finally appointed Chief Inspector of Constabulary and received a knighthood. George Sidney Lowe, from humble origins, had to prepare the police force for the rigours of World War II. William T. Hutchings joined the force in 1913 and reached Chief Constable 28 years later. He died in office in 1943. John Fawkes Skittery was reported to have lifted the force to an excellence reached by few, a man obviously loved and respected by his troops. And finally, from Blackpool, Ronald Gregory, who saw the amalgamation to Devon and Cornwall Constabulary, where he was appointed Deputy Chief of the amalgamated force. As the force reached the 1890s, towards the turn of the century, the number of constables grew to apparently combat the degenerating moral standards in society. Behavioural standards in public were a continuing cause for concern. Demoralising exhibitions in Union Street and indecent advertisements in beerhouses around Sutton were giving cause for concern. And a report of a boy singing obscene songs in Lockyer Street, together with the ever-rising numbers of male onlookers at the ladies' bathing pool under the Hoe, gave added strength to the resolve of the force in its policing of the city. By now, the famous police whistle was a regular sound on the streets of Plymouth. In 1887, the command of the fire brigade was handed to the Chief Constable, who also became Chief Fire Officer. 20 constables were appointed to deal with firefighting in the city at a retainer of 20 shillings per annum. And this arrangement continued until 1941, when the National Fire Service was formed as a direct result of the war, leaving the police to deal with the increasing crime statistics. This memorable photograph, taken at the turn of the century at Plymouth Guildhall, aptly portrays the changing face of policing over the years. Each one of the officers were both members of the police force and serving active participants on the fire appliances of the day. The 1920s saw overwhelming poverty and mass unemployment. The Plymouth Police, while predominantly a deterrent to crime, also provided a watchful eye, looking for those cursed with poverty, particularly in the run-down areas of Plymouth such as Stonehouse and Devonport. Tired and weary from his day's intensive search for work, a devoted father and husband has fallen on hard times. In this unique archive movie footage recently discovered, a portrait of police activity in very unusual circumstances is revealed. Despite the age and deteriorating quality of the images, it is a moving and heart-rending story. Rather than ridicule or demoralise the unfortunate out-of-work breadwinner, observant women of the parish are concerned for their neighbour. What can they do? One lady goes off in search of the local beat bobby to report the matter to him. The policeman immediately investigates, identifies the need and renders immediate assistance. No radios or panda cars, just a kindly hand of support, a gentle word of concern for a fellow human. Come on lad, let's get you home. The patrolman is obviously concerned for the welfare of the unfortunate job seeker. But this is the way things are. Natural affection and a spirit of caring prevails. It's the 1920s, and many people don't need locks on their doors. Arriving home at Stonehouse, the man's wife is distraught, for not only is her husband a victim of unemployment, but he is suffering from a worrying sickness as well. Bring him indoors. Inside, there's no peace, and anxiety is rife. There's no money, no food, no heat, and the children are impoverished, hungry and cold. A man's right to work gives him dignity, but there's no work and no means to support those he loves. Plymouth, like the rest of the country, is suffering from deep recession. The children are innocent victims with hardly a garment without holes or one that is not in need of repair. Urchins they were often referred to, but they're just unfortunate products of a sad society. Here's a few bob for you, ma'am. The police constable has seen enough. He's convinced that help is desperately needed, and now is the time for immediate action. No paperwork or lengthy forms to complete, no queues to see if a soul qualifies for help and assistance from the Parish Fund. In the 1920s, there is no social security or income support. Only the local Parish Fund, based on voluntary donations and other charitable income, is available to those in need. The Chief Constable, who not only oversees law enforcement in the city, but also assists in the administration of this Parish Fund in Plymouth. In other parts of the country, the fund is supervised by other committees in various locations. The arrangement not only provides cash for needy ones, but also distributes clothing and the basic necessities of life. To qualify, it is necessary to be means tested, and our constable has already set things in motion. There's definitely a need. Duty demands that the PC follows through in this work, and within a short period, the mother and children have been invited to Stonehouse Police Station to receive desperately needed assistance. Pride is no barrier to those needs. A woman has to do what a woman has to do, and this woman needs clothing for her children. A happy ending indeed. Even the Chief Constable and his wife are there to wish them well. But the presence of an old 35mm movie camera and its operator may have influenced them just a little bit. And so the hero from the Plymouth Constabulary finally demonstrates that policing a city in the 1920s involves so much more than crime and prevention. Thank you so much, Mr. Plod. The once impoverished family now revels in self-respect. Father has a job, the wife can procure life's necessities again, and the children, happy and full, are ready to face the challenges of a new day. Dignity is restored, and the community has once again benefited from the humanitarian actions of the Plymouth Police as they go forward in their quest to police a city. It's Tuesday afternoon, and effective administration of the fund also requires the unpaid assistance of volunteers to distribute the resources. Wives of policemen are regular Tuesday participants in the cause, mending, sewing, seaming and machining, generating all that would be needed for the smooth running of this charitable work. Even Mrs. Saunders, wife of the Chief Constable, offers her unpaid assistance. Whatever class distinction may have existed, kindness and charity is more than evident. In fact, on a large scale, people care, and such care reaches into the heart of policing of the city. The needs are great, and the stores are constantly hungering for relief supplies. Shoes, shirts, aprons, dresses. Mrs. Sanders proudly shows off the diverse gifts to the poor and needy. Always available, but never enough. Members of the parish are invited to send a postcard to the Chief Constable, who in turn will ensure that any left-off clothing or boots will be collected for the stores. And outside, our ancestors from 70 years ago eagerly and patiently line up. Men, women, children, awaiting their much-needed gifts of the basic necessities of life. Faces from our distant past, most now long forgotten, but then so dependent on charitable works and a kindly police officer to keep a watchful eye in order to identify their needs. Just how the force is always on the lookout for needy cases in the Plymouth area is aptly portrayed in this unique 35mm movie footage captured in 1926. A group of young children are playing on wasteland in the Stonehouse area. It becomes apparent that some of them are in need of charitable help. In the background is the old hospital, which later became Devonport High and Tamer Secondary School. The local bobby is an integral part of the community with a regular and prominent beat, controlled within city boundaries. A kind-hearted member of the force, he sees the crowd of children playing and moves in to investigate. He identifies those in need. They're poorly clad, and the weather being extremely cold prompts him to action. He invites them to Stonehouse Police Station, albeit without the presence of a responsible adult. This is not an arrest, but the inspector wants to know why the constable has 2 children with him. They're in rags and tatters and in need of help. Arriving at busy Union Street with trams crossing in every direction, the constable seeks an officer on point duty directing the traffic, which must always give way to children crossing the street. The policeman looks out for the safety of the children, and at the same time the constable with the children explains the fundamentals of road safety to them. Arriving at Stonehouse, they will be supplied with suitable garments and boots, the necessities of life for 2 little Plymouth urchins. But they'll have to take their turn. It's a busy day, and there are so many others requiring assistance. Leave the station and, accompanied by the Chief Constable and his wife, are happy and satisfied. There's a sense of great satisfaction and pride that the Plymouth Police have been able to render humanitarian assistance. Thank you so much, everyone, and goodbye. Tucked away on an industrial estate in Exeter is the recently established Devon and Cornwall Police Museum under the direction of Brian Estelle. Here all manner of police memorabilia is stored for future posterity and reference. It was here also that Aarchive Productions discovered those priceless movie images screened earlier. Keeping in mind our theme of policing the City of Plymouth, curator Brian explains how policing implements have changed through the years.
Some of the earliest handcuffs were like this, and these dated from the late 1700s, early 1800s. The problem was you had to work them for several minutes to unscrew them, snap them on the prisoner's wrists, and then fasten them up again. They then came up with this version, the snips, again the early 1800s onwards, and these, you snapped that part over the prisoner's wrist, snapped that part together, the officer held it and was able to guide the prisoner along. And if he misbehaved, a little tweak would cause a little bit of pain. And then to release them, the officer just released this clip which opened them. Then they came up with the shackle type handcuffs, and these lasted from the early 1800s right up to the present day. The only difference being that modern ones are chrome plated, and these are still in use today. Then there was the ratchet type, which came from America, and there they just snap on. Until you come to the modern ones, the quick cuffs, as used by this force, and these are a version of the ratchet handcuffs but with a rigid bar joining them. The only problem with these, because of the rigid bar, they can cause damage to the wrists, so officers have to have special training before they're allowed to carry them.
Old and new policing have the same basic objectives, and this is to preserve the tranquility of the community and ensure that swift response is made where criminal conduct is evident. Whilst difficult conditions in the late 20th century may challenge the modern police force, the principle of high visibility policing is a policy of the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary. The presence of patrolling officers on the streets are intended to give reassurance to the general public and satisfy demands for greater police presence in the community. Noise, intrusion and danger from road traffic has eroded the quality of life in the cities such as Plymouth in the 20th century. Traffic can be heavy, and in 1995 11 fatal accidents occurred on the roads of Plymouth. Half of those were pedestrians or cyclists. In that year, during the month of August, almost 40,000 vehicles a day were recorded entering Plymouth from the Tamar Bridge, with over 42,500 vehicles passing through Embankment Road. But things were a little different 70 years ago. This road safety film, recently discovered, helped the people of Plymouth to be conscious of the ever-increasing problems of traffic. With the kind permission of Alderman W.J. Modley JP, Chairman of the Watch Committee of the Borough of Plymouth, and Alderman Meyer Redmond JP, Chairman of the Transport Committee, Chief Constable H.H. Sanders presents this road safety film for the citizens of our town. The problem of street traffic is one that has been engaging the attention of the authorities for some time. Owing to the tremendous increase in mechanical transports, the streets of Plymouth are becoming more dangerous and the safety of pedestrians is threatened. It is 1926 and people of Plymouth have to contend with increasing traffic. Constables are now placed on duty at busy junctions to direct the traffic, and they wear white cuffs to make them conspicuous. They're placed on point duty not only to direct mechanical vehicles, but also to make a way for pedestrians to cross the busy roads in safety. Everyone must cross the road wherever possible where they see a pointsman on duty. Watch out for the pointsman. He could save your life. Policemen are especially concerned for young children, as we can see here. All children must look for the constables before crossing busy roads. One of our officers is helping children across the road at Hyde Park Corner, which is becoming a very busy part of Mutley Plain. A new device has been introduced to make the streets safer and control the traffic more effectively. It is the white line in the streets. The idea is that mechanical vehicles must stay their own side of the white lines. This new idea will revolutionise traffic control and make roads safer, and this will reduce the number of accidents in Plymouth. Just listen to this. In 1923, there were 689 accidents, and in 349 cases, people were injured. 5 were killed. Many people walk about the streets carelessly and often run into danger. When stepping off the pavement, always face towards the traffic, or else this could happen. Don't step off the footpath without looking both ways. Wait just a minute, and perhaps it will save your life. And now, a word to you motorists. The following are the correct ways to signal so that the driver of the vehicle following will know what you intend to do. Pillion riders on motorcycles are responsible for a large portion of motorcycle accidents. Drivers of motorcycles, you must take care as you're responsible for your own and your passengers' safety. A great number of serious accidents occur because boys and girls do silly and dangerous things. They like to steal a cheap ride on the back of a motor or tram. This is very dangerous, as we can see from this accident in Wolseley Road just below Milehouse Hill. A young man wants a lift to Ford, but this is no way to do it. Just watch and see, as this could be you. So boys and girls, don't try and get rides in this way. One such act may result in your being injured and made a cripple for life. A ride obtained in this way may be a very dear one and not a cheapy one, so children, be wise and take care from now on. And just look at the trouble you can cause if you're not careful. Boys and girls like to play whip top in the street. They're so eager to whip that top that they forget that the motor's coming and are likely to get knocked down. Whip top is very nice for boys and girls, but should be played in the school playground. Swinging around a lamppost is also very dangerous, and you could hurt yourself if a motor car comes. Children, this is a very silly thing to do unless you're very, very careful. And trolleys are fun too, but these can be dangerous if you don't control them properly. Going fast down the hill is great fun, but what if a motor car is coming the other way? And finally, a warning about the dangers involved with trams. You cyclists and pedestrians, just take note of the following and be sensible when trams are close by. Hard to believe, but 1,000 children from Plymouth's slums and rundown areas are on their way to the local cinema on the 23rd of December 1924 under the kindly direction of 3 police constables. Well behaved and not a hint of trouble. It's here, preserved on film from the 1920s. Inspired by Chief Constable H.H. Sanders, this event was possible because discipline is in full operation. It's a sign of the times. After all, why kick against the hand that helps you? And afterwards they can look forward to a slap-up tea at the Plymouth Guildhall. It'll cost a fortune to feed 1,000 children, but the limited funds will run to it. After all, it's all a part of policing a city.
Early policemen wore top hats. These were generally slightly taller than this one, and they were well painted with paint or with tar to make them stronger and more waterproof. In fact, a good top hat, you used to be able to stand on it to give extra height to look over walls and things. Then they adopted the helmet from the military-style helmet, and this was pieces of cork sewn together and covered with material on both sides. It gave good protection against the weather and against blows. And with only minor differences to the badges and other furniture on it, it lasted until very recently.
After the difficult days of the 1920s, the Plymouth Constabulary faced a serious challenge in the 1930s when a period of considerable unrest at Dartmoor Prison, caused by complaints over the standard of food, began on the 25th of January 1932. The prisoners armed themselves with shovels, crowbars and tools from the prison workshops and overpowered a number of warders. They set fire to one administrative office and threatened to burn down the whole prison if their demands were not met. It had been anticipated that serious trouble would arise, and the Plymouth police were alerted. The army were also called to surround the prison. Before a mass breakout could be attempted, the police arrived and, charging through the gates, quickly overpowered the mutineers and forced them back to their cells. By dealing with the situation promptly and firmly, a potentially dangerous incident was quickly diffused without any serious injury. 33 prisoners were charged with such offences as attempted murder, causing bodily harm, rioting and committing willful damage. 11 were acquitted and the remainder received sentences ranging from 6 months imprisonment to 10 years penal servitude. Individually prominent in suppressing the mutiny was the Chief Constable, Archibald Wilson, who was reportedly resolute in leading his men into action against the mutineers. These images, captured on an amateur 8mm cine camera in the late 1960s, recall a number of smaller police stations scattered around the Plymouth area. When Kerr Street, Devonport was closed, the administration was transferred to Exmouth Road overlooking Devonport Park. With so many smaller stations in existence at this time, it has been suggested that crime statistics were manageable under Plymouth City control. And in his book From Rattles to Radio, Ernest Dickety commented that in his experience and until the 1967 amalgamations, the successive prosecutions were so that the net cost of employing solicitors for the force never reached £1,000 in any one year. Motorists were treated kindly, cars could be left under or near lighted street lamps, and speed limits were sensibly administered. Camel's Head Station in Wolseley Road was prominent in the approaches to St Budo for many years, but was demolished to make way for the expansion of Devonport Dockyard. West Park was no longer required when the Crown Hill headquarters was opened only a few miles up the road. It was in 1966 that the bombshell of the forthcoming amalgamations fell, just a year after the appointment of Ronald Gregory as the last serving Chief Constable of the Plymouth Force. Major expansion was already underway after the mid-1960s, at which time traffic wardens were also appointed to relieve the police of a mundane duty and thus release officers for more pressing matters. Things were heading for major changes in the way communities were to be policed. And finally, the amateur cine camera captured these images of Greenbank, which served the city headquarters of the Plymouth Constabulary for 32 event-filled years until the amalgamations in 1967. It was here that Ernest Dickety spent much of his professional life. As we shall see later, there are memorable events to relate. Once a hustling, bustling centre of police activity, surrounded by a fire station and two prominent hospitals, namely Freedom Fields and Greenbank. It was here that the establishment of specialised squads to deal with criminal matters such as fraud, assaults and break-ins was pioneered, and Greenbank served the community during the turbulent years of World War II. The police headquarters was housed in the old H.M. Greenbank prison, as it was known, built in 1849. It was constructed as a borough prison with cells for 60 prisoners, including 6 for male and 3 for female debtors. In those days, non-payment of debts could often result in a prison sentence. There were 4 solitary cells constructed to let in air, but no light. The building is now empty, but the memories remain. The Chief Constable's office, where troops were often summoned for telling off or commendation. Whatever the reason for the visit, you usually stood outside the door with apprehension. The custody cells held all manner of criminal, and it was on this cell landing that the last birching took place in 1943, much to the reported horror and disapproval of the serving Chief Constable, John Skittery, who was unable to prevent it. A teenage offender was sentenced to a birching by the juvenile court. The ridges that held the birch can still be seen over this cell door. The actual punishment was administered by the duty senior constable, and the implement used was reportedly the dusting end of a besom broom. Today, the unused building exudes a haunting silence, and it's hard to visualize the hive of activity that characterized this busy station. In the basement of the building, the old prison cells, as well as holding those arrested, also served as the control room for the city force during the turbulent years of World War II. With the sound of air raid sirens, the staff would hurriedly retreat to this basement for safety, while shutters were hurriedly locked into the upstairs windows to close off light during night raids and prevent damage from shattered glass. These old cells, dating back to 1849, housed all manner of criminal. But interestingly, the old Greenbank prison never did experience planned expansion, for it was here in 1871 that a maximum of 43 prisoners were recorded, including 2 teenage girls and a prison built to house 60 inmates. Overcrowding was never a problem. How times have changed. To appear before the magistrates, detainees were removed from these cells and taken to the upper landing through this door, which led to the courtroom where legal decisions were argued and sentences passed by the local magistrates. The court served the community during World War II, when, despite the threats from a common aggressor, there was no let-up in crime, resulting in the necessity to arrest and punish lawbreakers in the community. Winifred Hooper, now retired, was a serving WPC at Greenbank Police Headquarters during the turbulent years of World War II. She remembers vividly astounding events of a summer's night in June of 1943, when a German bomb hit the Greenbank Police Station just after midnight, penetrated the roof, but failed to explode.
Yes, well, I was on duty that night with Yvonne, another WAPC, and we were just settling down for the night when the air raid siren went. So we went down made our way to the control room, and we were just descending the stairs into the control room when we heard this terrific whistling above us, and it sounded as if it was coming from my particular head. They say you never hear the bomb that hits you, but we certainly heard that one. And just stopped, and then went on down, and then there was this terrific noise above us. We realised we'd been hit, and we were just waiting for the explosion, which, thank God, didn't come. And then Chief Inspector Denley came down and said that there was an unexploded bomb above us, and we had to evacuate the building. So just as we were leaving the control room, all the phones started to ring, but we were not allowed to stop and answer them. And we made our way to the front office, which was just inside the main entrance. And as we got there, 2 German airmen who had ditched their plane had been hit, and they'd been brought in, and they said that there was no need to worry too much about the bomb. It was unlikely to go off, as the rot had set in Germany, and there were a lot of dud bombs being made.
The Second World War was over, and the task of rebuilding Plymouth was a daunting one. But the surviving population emerged from the rigours of the war with a characteristic stoic philosophy as befitting the people of the city. The force had bravely policed one of Britain's most devastated areas through hostilities that had almost completely flattened the city centre. Only a few areas, such as here at Drake Circus, survived the attacks. It was on the 1st of January 1946 that regular wireless patrols were introduced to improve policing techniques. All vehicles were fitted with radio systems, and response time was set at 4 minutes. In later years, motorcycle patrols were introduced into the northern parts of the city and nicknamed affectionately Skittery's Light Horse. For John Skittery had emerged as a favourite Chief Constable with his troops, and at the time of his death a newspaper article stated, "Plymouth has much for which to thank the Chief Constable. He adopted a most sensible policy towards the motorist, and whilst he was a tough policeman in many ways, he differed from his colleagues in not regarding the motorist as public enemy number 1. In similar vein, Ernest Dickety felt that something went out of the life of the Plymouth City Police Force when Mr. Skittery retired in 1965, something that was never replaced. Certainly the 2 years which were left before amalgamation never recaptured the spirit of those earlier years, years during which the force had been lifted to very great heights, reported Mr. Dickety. Policing of cities was about to change, and only memories and artefacts would remain, according to some, as an epitaph to the way things used to be.
The Before there was an organised police force, parish constables had no uniform, so they used to carry one of these as their staff of office. This was their symbol of office. It used to bear the royal coat of arms or else the coat of arms of the parish or borough that they came from. Truncheons then became weapons of defence. There is one example here. This was used in Exeter until the early 1920s, rather like a rolling pin. And that was the standard shape and size of truncheon, which lasted until very recently. In fact, a lot of them are still carried today by officers.
And so to the 12th of May 1967, the final colourful parade of the force through the city of Plymouth that it had been proud to serve for over 130 years. Headed by the band of the Royal Marines and comprising maximum numbers of personnel of all territorial and specialised divisions of the Special Constabulary, a civic reception at the Lord Mayor's parlour followed a service at St Andrew's Church. Although the official handover date was the 1st of June, just 3 weeks later, that day of the parade embodied over 130 years of activity and memories, and was a day to cherish for years to come, as Ernest Dickety recalled.
Oh, I think really we got to the point of, well, it's inevitable. We had been told by the Home Office that there would be an amalgamation of the forces, and that was that. Well, I think, so far as the police were concerned, all right, it was a change of plan. We'd joined the Plymouth City Police. We were going to become part of a very great unit, starting from Land's End and finishing 200 miles up the road, with control centred upon Exeter. Devon County policing was rather different from Plymouth City policing. I experienced both, because when the amalgamation came about, they didn't quite know what to do with me. Certainly, everything that could help the association between the public and the police went on in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. Yes, certainly did. But it tended to change when the big force came in and people were moved about. They didn't know necessarily who was who, and so they had to try and learn. But I don't think the association was anything like as good after amalgamation than it was before.
Stirring memories indeed of those special years when the Plymouth Constabulary policed the city of Plymouth.
Rhythm on the inside, rhythm on the street, and the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. Oh, the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. There's a tingle in your fingers and a tone in your feet. Rhythm on the inside, rhythm on the street, and the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. Oh, the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. There's a tingle in your fingers and a tone in your feet. Rhythm on the inside, rhythm on the street, and the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. To feel the rhythm of life, to feel the powerful beat, to feel the tingle in your fingers, to feel the tingle in your life, life, life.
Please visit our website for news about new productions that are on the way, and you can support my work on my Patreon page. Thank you.